Mr. Chief Justice, distinguished members of the Senate, I thank you once again for your indulgence and for your courtesy as we all undertake our solemn constitutional responsibilities during this Senate trial. George Washington once observed in his farewell address to the nation that the Constitution is sacredly obligatory upon all. That means everyone. And in fact, that is what makes our great country so distinct from authoritarian regimes and enemies of democracy. Vladimir Putin is above the law in Russia. Erdogan is above the law in Turkey. Kim Jong-un is above the law in North Korea. But in the United States of America, no one is above the law, not even the President of the United States. That is what this moment is all about. As we all know, Congress is a separate and co-equal branch of government. We don't work for this president or any president. We, of course, work for the American people. We have a constitutional responsibility to serve as a check and balance on an out-of-control executive branch. That is not the Democratic Party playbook. That is not the Republican Party playbook. That is the playbook in a democratic republic. James Madison once observed in Federalist 51 that the Congress should serve as a rival to the executive branch. In my humble opinion, why would Madison use the word rival? It's because the framers of the Constitution, I think, did not want a king. They did not want a dictator. They did not want a monarch. They wanted a democracy. The Constitution is sacredly obligatory upon all. It is through that lens that we proceed today. For the next few moments, I would like to discuss President Trump's July 25th phone call with Ukraine's newly elected leader. The president claims that his call was perfect. Nothing can be further from the truth. The call is direct evidence of President Trump's solicitation of foreign interference in the 2020 election as part of a corrupt scheme. It is important, of course, to remember the context of this call. The new Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky, was in a vulnerable position and viewed American and diplomatic military support as critical to his standing and to Ukraine's fragile future as a democracy. Equally significant, as outlined by my colleagues, America has a strong national security interest in supporting Ukraine against Russia's continued aggression. William Taylor, West Point graduate, Vietnam War hero, ambassador to Ukraine, appointed by Donald Trump, testified, Ukraine is a strategic partner of the United States, important for the security of our country as well as Europe. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, National Security Council officer, Trump appointee, Purple Heart recipient, Iraq War veteran, testified a strong and independent Ukraine is critical to our national security interests. Ukraine remains under attack by Russian-backed separatists in Crimea. It is an ongoing hot war. Ukraine is a friend, Russia is a foe. Ukraine is a democracy. Russia is a dictatorship. The United States may very well be one of the only things standing between Russia and Ukraine being completely overrun as part of Vladimir Putin's continued aggression against the free world. That is why this Congress allocated $391 million in military and security aid to a vulnerable Ukraine on a bipartisan basis, because it is in America's national security interests. On the July 25th call, Mr. Trump could have endeavored to strengthen the relationship with this new Ukrainian leader. Instead, President Trump focused on securing a personal favor. He wanted Ukraine to conduct phony investigations designed to enhance his political standing and solicit foreign interference in the 2020 election. On a July 25th call, President Trump maligned a highly respected American ambassador known as an anti-corruption crusader. At the same time, he praised a corrupt former Ukrainian prosecutor. And on multiple occasions, President Trump directed Ukraine's new leader to speak with his personal lawyer, Rudolph Giuliani, on an official call. Mr. Giuliani is not a member of the Trump administration. For these and other reasons, the July 25th call warrants our close scrutiny. It presents significant and shocking evidence of President Trump's corrupt intent. The call lays bare the president's willingness to do whatever it takes to get what he wants, even if his behavior undermines the national security interests of the United States of America. At the beginning of the call, President Zelensky mentioned U.S. military aid, and he states, "I would also like to thank you for your great support in the area of defense." The great support in the area of defense includes the security assistance passed by this Congress on a bipartisan basis that Donald Trump held up in violation of the law. Immediately after President Zelensky raised the issue of defense support, President Trump responded, "I would like you to do us a favor, though." These words will live in infamy. First, President Trump said to President Zelensky, as part of the two demands that he requested, "I would like you to find out what happened with this whole situation in Ukraine. They say CrowdStrike. I guess you have one of your wealthy people, the server, they say, Ukraine has it." President Trump continued, "I would like to have the Attorney General call you or your people, and I would like you to get to the bottom of it. As you saw yesterday, that whole nonsense ended with a very poor performance by a man named Robert Mueller, a Vietnam War hero, by the way. A very poor performance by a man named Robert Mueller, an incompetent performance. But they say a lot of it started with Ukraine. Whatever you can do, it's very important that you do it if that's possible." Who is the they referred to by President Trump, putting forth the baseless conspiracy theory that the Ukrainians, not the Russians, were behind the hack of the Democratic National Committee server in 2016? They means Russia. They means Putin. They are enemies of the United States. Not a single witness who testified before the House knew of any factual basis for President Trump's belief in the CrowdStrike Ukraine fairy tale. To the contrary, the U.S. intelligence community and this Senate Intelligence Committee assessed that Russia interfered in the 2016 election. As Dr. Fiona Hill testified, the theory that Ukraine interfered in the 2016 election is, quote, a fictional narrative that has been perpetrated and propagated by the Russian security services. The conspiracy theory that President Trump advanced on the July 25th phone call is stone-cold Russian propaganda. As early as February 2017, Vladimir Putin began to promote this lie during a press conference, saying, quote, the Ukrainian government adopted a unilateral position in favor of one candidate. More than that, certain oligarchs, certainly with the approval of the political leadership, funded this candidate, or female candidate, to be precise. Those are the words of Vladimir Putin, a script apparently adopted by President Donald John Trump. If there was any doubt about who benefits from this unfounded, Russian-inspired conspiracy theory advanced by Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin made it clear when he said in November of 2019, thank God no one is accusing us anymore of interfering in U.S. elections. Now they're accusing Ukrainians. Unfortunately, this is not the first time President Trump tried to capitalize on Russian propaganda and misinformation for his own political benefit. On July 24th, just one day before this call, Special Counsel Robert Mueller testified before Congress that the Russian government interfered in the 2016 election in sweeping and systematic fashion in order to support the Trump campaign and divide America. Mr. Mueller also found that the Trump campaign welcomed Russian interference in the 2016 election and utilized it as part of its campaign messaging. Despite the clear and overwhelming conclusion of U.S. intelligence agencies, as well as the distinguished Senate Intelligence Committee, that Russia, not Ukraine, interfered in the 2016 election, President Trump continued to press the new Ukrainian leader to announce an investigation into the CrowdStrike Ukraine conspiracy theory. Why? President Trump sought a political favor. That's why. As part of a scheme to solicit foreign interference in the 2020 election. The second demand made by President Trump on the July 25th call related to the campaign of Vice President Joe Biden, who announced his intention to run for the office of the presidency last April. Throughout the spring and early summer of last year, public polling consistently showed that Biden would decisively defeat President Trump. In fact, on June 16th of last year, June 16th, a Fox News poll showed that President Trump would lose to Joe Biden by 10 points. The concern with Joe Biden's candidacy provides motive for President Trump's demand that the Ukrainian government investigate the former vice president and his son, Hunter. Here is what President Trump said on that call. The other thing, there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution. And a lot of people want to find out about that, so whatever you can do with the Attorney General would be great. Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution, so if you can look into it, it sounds horrible to me. Now, the Trump administration officials who participated in the impeachment inquiry unanimously testified that there was no factual support for the allegation that Vice President Biden did anything wrong or misused his authority when he pressed for the removal of Ukraine's corrupt former prosecutor general. Joe Biden did nothing wrong. The witnesses testified that Vice President Biden was in fact carrying out official U.S. policy to clean up the Prosecutor General's office in Ukraine. This policy, of course, aligned with the perspective of many in this very distinguished body, as well as our European allies throughout the world, as well as the International Monetary Fund. Vice President Biden did not remove Yuri Lutsenko, the corrupt prosecutor. The Ukrainian government did, with the support of the free world. Nonetheless, on October 3rd, 2019, when a reporter asked President Trump, "What exactly did you hope Zelensky would do about the Bidens after your phone call?" President Trump responded as follows.
Mr. President, what exactly did you hope Zelensky would do about the Bidens after your phone call? Exactly.
Well, I would think that if they were honest about it, they'd start a major investigation into the Bidens. It's a very simple answer.
Start a major investigation into the Bidens. The evidence of wrongdoing by President Trump is hiding in plain sight. During the July 25th call, President Trump also repeatedly pressed the Ukrainian president to coordinate with his personal attorney, Rudolph Giuliani. Why was Rudolph Giuliani's name mentioned multiple times during the July 25th phone call? Giuliani is not the Secretary of State. He's not an ambassador. He's not a member of the diplomatic corps. Rudolph Giuliani is a cold-blooded political operative for President Trump's re-election campaign. That is why he was referenced multiple times on that July 25th phone call. And it is evidence of corrupt intent by President Trump. By the time the call took place, President Zelensky understood Giuliani's connection to the shakedown scheme. He recognized Giuliani's role as the president's political operative as matters related to Ukraine. Zelensky informed President Trump that one of his aides spoke with Mr. Giuliani just recently, and we are hoping very much that Mr. Giuliani will be able to travel to Ukraine, and we will meet once he comes. The Ukrainian leader knew Giuliani represented President Trump's political interest in his country and could help unlock the long sought-after Oval Office meeting that President Zelensky desired. The phony investigations sought by President Trump on the July 25th call were not designed to bolster the national security interests of the United States of America. Quite the contrary, President Trump sought to benefit himself and his own reelection prospects. On the July 25th call, President Trump also suggested that President Zelensky speak with the Attorney General, William Barr, about the two fake investigations that the president sought. This is important to keep in mind. At no time during this entire sordid scheme was there an ongoing American law enforcement investigation into the phony slander related to Joe Biden or the conspiracy theory related to Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election. At no time was there an ongoing American law enforcement investigation. America is the leader of the free world. We do not urge other sovereign countries to target American citizens, absent any legitimate basis whatsoever, absent any scintilla of evidence. Apparently, President Trump does not play by those rules. During the July 25th call, President Trump didn't raise legitimate corruption concerns as it relates to Ukraine. President Trump did not mention the word corruption once. The president did, however, viciously malign former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, a distinguished anti-corruption advocate whom he abruptly removed because she was seen as an obstacle to his geopolitical shakedown. Ambassador Yovanovitch joined the diplomatic corps under President Ronald Reagan and subsequently served 3 other Republican presidents. She is a highly respected diplomat and foreign service professional. Yet, President Trump told the new Ukrainian leader, the former ambassador from the United States, the woman, was bad news, and the people she was dealing with in the Ukraine were bad news. So I just want to let you know that. He didn't stop there. Later in the call, President Trump ominously added, well, she's going to go through some things. These are the words of the President of the United States of America. Ambassador Yovanovitch did not know of President Trump's disparaging remarks at the time. She didn't learn of them until the call record became public in September. Asked whether she felt threatened by President Trump's statement that she was going to go through some things, Ambassador Yovanovitch answered that she did. Here is what she said.
The next excerpt, when the president references you, was a short one, but he said, well, she's going to go through some things. What did you think when President Trump told President Zelensky and you read that you were going to go through some things?
I didn't know what to think, but I was very concerned.
What were you concerned about?
She's going to go through some things. It didn't sound good. It sounded like a threat.
Did you feel threatened?
I did.
During that same call, President Trump also took the opportunity to praise Yuri Lutsenko. Mr. Lutsenko is the former Ukrainian prosecutor general who was widely regarded by the entire free world, including our European allies and the International Monetary Fund, to be corrupt and incompetent. But Donald John Trump, our president, praised him on that call. He told President Zelensky, quote, "I heard you had a prosecutor who was very good, and he was shut down, and that's really unfair." A lot of people are talking about that, the way they shut your very good prosecutor down. And you had some very bad people involved. Think about this contrast. The president bashed a career American diplomat, an anti-corruption champion, who he unceremoniously removed because she was viewed as an obstacle to his efforts to solicit foreign interference in the 2020 election, and at the same time, praise someone who he thought could be an asset, a corrupt Ukrainian prosecutor, who the free world viewed as an obstacle to the rule of law. The idea that President Trump cares about corruption is laughable. It's laughable. Plain reading of the rough transcript of the July 25th call also sheds light on the quid pro quo involving the Oval Office meeting that had been sought. President Zelensky said on the call, "I also wanted to thank you for your invitation to visit the United States, specifically Washington, D.C. On the other hand, I also wanted to ensure that we will be very serious about the case and will work on the investigation." As all of you know, here in this distinguished body, quid pro quo is a Latin term. It means this for that. The statement that I just read shows that President Zelensky fully understood at the time of this July 25th call that if he yielded to President Trump's demand for phony investigations, he would get the White House meeting in the Oval Office that he desperately sought. This for that. President Trump has repeatedly insisted that his July 25th conversation with President Zelensky was a perfect call. His staff at the White House apparently believed otherwise. The press office issued a short and incomplete summary of the July 25th call. Let me read it for your hearing. Today, President Donald J. Trump spoke by telephone with President Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine to congratulate him on his recent
The Senate will be in order. The Sergeant at Arms will restore order in the gallery.
And the scripture says, "For the Lord loves justice and will not abandon his faithful ones." Official White House call readout, July 25th, 2019. Today, President Donald J. Trump spoke by telephone with President Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine to congratulate him on his recent election. President Trump and President Zelensky discussed ways to strengthen the relationship between the United States and Ukraine, including energy and economic cooperation. Both leaders also expressed that they look forward to the opportunity to meet. That is the official White House call readout dated July 25th, 2019. The official readout provided to the American people omitted key elements of the president's conversation. Let's review. The official readout did not mention the phony investigations requested by President Trump. The official readout did not mention the Oval Office meeting sought by President Zelensky. The official readout did not mention President Trump's elevation of a debunked conspiracy theory promoted by Vladimir Putin about 2016 election interference. The official readout did not mention President Trump's demand that Ukraine investigate his domestic political rival, Joe Biden. The official readout did not mention that President Trump maligned and threatened Ambassador Yovanovitch. And the official readout did not mention that President Trump praised a corrupt former Ukrainian prosecutor. The complete conversation, however, between President Trump and President Zelensky that we just outlined offers powerful evidence that President Trump abused his power and solicited foreign interference in the 2016 election, the 2020 election. Several members of the president's staff listening in on the call immediately grew concerned. As he sat in the White House Situation Room listening to the conversation, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman realized that the president's demands of the Ukrainian leader were inappropriate and improper. He quickly recognized that as the president began referencing the Bidens and CrowdStrike, the call was diverging from the official National Security Council approved talking points that he helped prepare. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, 20-year Iraq War veteran, Purple Heart recipient, and American patriot. He testified in the context of the call that due to the unequal bargaining position of the two leaders and Ukraine's dependence on the United States, the favor that President Trump sought would have been perceived by President Zelensky as a demand. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman worried that the call would undermine U.S. national security interests, and he knew immediately that he had a duty to report the contents of the call to White House lawyers.
I was concerned by the call. What I heard was inappropriate, and I reported my concerns to Mr. Eisenberg. It is improper for the President of the United States to demand a foreign government investigate a U.S. citizen and a political opponent. I was also clear that if Ukraine pursued an investigation, it was also clear that if Ukraine pursued an investigation into the 2016 elections, the Bidens and Burisma, it would be interpreted as a partisan play. This would undoubtedly result in Ukraine losing bipartisan support, undermining U.S. national security, and advancing Russia's strategic objectives in the region.
Recounting the content of the call based on his detailed handwritten notes, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman told the lawyers that he believed it was wrong for President Trump to ask President Zelensky to investigate Vice President Biden. Other witnesses were also troubled by what they heard. Vice President Pence's advisor, Jennifer Williams, expressed concern that President Trump raised a domestic political matter on an official call with a foreign leader. She testified that the mention of investigations struck her as unusual and possibly political in nature. She said, "I guess for me, it shed some light on possible other motives behind a security assistance hold." Timothy Morrison, a former Republican congressional staffer who replaced Dr. Fiona Hill in July of 2019, also reported the call to National Security Council lawyers. After the call, President Trump continued to push the scheme forward. On July 26, the very next day, Ambassador Sondland and Ambassador Taylor met with President Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials in Kyiv. According to David Holmes, the Ukraine-based U.S. diplomat who served as the note-taker, the Ukrainian leader mentioned that President Trump had brought up some very sensitive issues during the July 25th call. Very sensitive issues. Ambassador Sondland then had a private meeting with Andrei Yermak, President Zelensky's top aide. The two men insisted that the meeting be one-on-one with no note-taker, perhaps due to the sensitive issues that might come up. Ambassador Sondland testified that he and President Zelensky's aide probably discussed the issue of investigations. After these key moments in Ukraine, Ambassador Sondland went to lunch with David Holmes and two other American officials. Mr. Holmes sat directly across from Ambassador Sondland, close enough to hear the details of an extraordinary telephone call between Mr. Sondland and President Trump. As Mr. Holmes relayed during his sworn testimony under oath, Ambassador Sondland pulled out his unsecured cell phone and said that he was going to call President Trump to give him an update. What happened next was shocking.
While Ambassador Sondland's phone was not on speakerphone, I could hear the president's voice through the earpiece of the phone. The president's voice was loud and recognizable, and Ambassador Sondland held the phone away from his ear for a period of time, presumably because of the loud volume. I heard Ambassador Sondland greet the president and explain he was calling from Kyiv. I heard President Trump then clarify that Ambassador Sondland was in Ukraine. Ambassador Sondland replied, yes, he was in Ukraine, and went on to state that President Zelensky, quote, loves your ass. I then heard President Trump ask, so he's going to do the investigation. Ambassador Sondland replied that he's going to do it, adding that President Zelensky will do anything you ask him to do.
He's going to do it. He will do anything you ask him to do. Immediately after this call with President Trump, Mr. Holmes followed up with Ambassador Sondland.
After the call ended, Ambassador Sondland remarked that the president was in a bad mood. As Ambassador Sondland stated, it was often the case early in the morning. I then took the opportunity to ask Ambassador Sondland for his candid impression of the president's views on Ukraine. In particular, I asked Ambassador Sondland if it was true that the president did not give an expletive about Ukraine. Ambassador Sondland agreed that the president did not give an expletive about Ukraine. I asked why not, and Ambassador Sondland stated that the president only cares about big stuff. I noted there was big stuff going on in Ukraine, like a war with Russia. And Ambassador Sondland replied that he meant big stuff that benefits the president, like the Biden investigation that Mr. Giuliani was pushing. The conversation then moved on to other topics.
During the July 25th call, President Trump asked for the favor of these two phony political investigations immediately after the Ukrainian president brought up defense assistance for Ukraine. And the following day, Ambassador Sondland confirmed to President Trump that Ukraine would indeed initiate the investigations discussed on the call, which was the only thing President cared about with respect to Ukraine. He didn't care that Russia was forcefully occupying eastern Ukraine. President Trump didn't care that thousands of Ukrainians apparently have died fighting for their democracy. He didn't seem to care that supporting Ukraine bolsters America's national security. But he cared about himself as it relates to the prospects of his reelection in 2020. In November, President Trump denied that he spoke to Ambassador Sondland on July 26, telling reporters, "I know nothing about that." But in his public testimony, Ambassador Sondland contradicted that assertion with official records he obtained from the White House. Ambassador Sondland further explained that Holmes's testimony refreshed his reelection about the July 26 call, which Ambassador Sondland had not originally described when he first appeared at a deposition before the House.
Also, on July 26, shortly after our Kiev meetings, I spoke by phone with President Trump. The White House, which has finally shared certain call dates and times with my attorneys, confirms this. The call lasted 5 minutes. I remember I was at a restaurant in Kiev, and I have no reason to doubt that this conversation included the subject of investigations. Again, given Mr. Giuliani's demand that President Zelensky make a public statement about investigations, I knew that investigations were important to President Trump.
President Trump said that his July 25th conversation was a perfect call. It was far from perfect. In a perfect call, the president would not demand a political favor from a vulnerable Ukraine under attack by a Russian foe. In a perfect call, the president would not demand that a foreign leader investigate a Russian-inspired conspiracy about the 2016 election. In a perfect call, the president would not pressure a foreign government to target an American citizen for political personal gain. In a perfect call, the president would not solicit foreign interference in the 2020 election. In a perfect call, the president would not threaten the well-being of a highly respected American ambassador and say that she was going to go through some things. In a perfect call, the president would not praise a disgraced former prosecutor who the free world viewed as corrupt and incompetent. And in a perfect call, the president would not have directed a foreign leader to follow up with Rudolph Giuliani, a human hand grenade. This was not a perfect call. It is direct evidence that President Donald John Trump corruptly abused his power and solicited foreign interference in the 2020 election.
The majority leader is recognized.